Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rates and Lanes podcast. I am your host, Rico Muhammad. I will be joined shortly by my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. And we have a special guest this evening. I'm going to allow Chuck to do the introductions once we bring him up and on board. But before we do, a little bit of housekeeping. If you guys would do us a huge favor, please like, share, and subscribe to the show. It helps us get out to a little bit of a better algorithm in the YouTube sense of the word and gets us out to more people. And if you find anyone, if you know of anyone that this information may be helpful or useful to, by all means, share it with them and tell a friend to tell a friend. And with that being said, and without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and welcome in my co-host, Mr. Chuck Snow. Good evening, Chuck. How are you?
I'm doing great, Rico. How are you doing?
I cannot complain. It's been a little while, a little bit of a hiatus for myself, but I'm back here in living color.
Yeah, you certainly are. Good to get on. Back in the saddle with you again, man. It's been a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I appreciate you for taking care of things and holding it down while I was out. But
well, that's what partners are for, man.
Interesting. So tonight, maybe a little bit of a different type of guest than we've had in the past, and I'm looking forward to an interesting conversation. Won't you tell us about tonight's guest?
Well, I've got Brad Durkin on. Brad owns a company. He's based out of Canada, but he works on all sides of the border, three sides. He works, I guess he's working out of Mexico as well. And he's kind of, best way I'm going to describe him, he's a trucking business broker in the fact that he brokers or facilitates the buying and selling of trucking businesses. So if you've got a trucking business you want to sell, or you're thinking about buying a trucking business, Brad is your man. He's been at this a while. I spoke to him quite frequently when I was working, not so frequently now that I'm no longer gainfully employed, but it's a real pleasure to have him on with us as our guest tonight. Brad, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. How are you? Nice to be on and talk to you guys. Yeah, you're right, though.
Did I describe Synergy Stockpile correctly?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I also do warehousing, logistics, customs broker, and some one-offs. But yep, that's right. I'm integrated into the sector you come from. And the first time we spoke was in 2012, so we do have some history.
Wow. Yeah. Time has flown. 13 years has gone by already.
Yeah.
So right now, we all know the trucking industry it's not doing well. Let's not kid ourselves. It's probably doing worse up in Canada than it is in the U.S. I don't know what it's like in Mexico. Any idea what's going on there? Same thing?
Mexico's robust. If you're talking tariffs, they've made a lot of deals with the U.S., is what I have understood. So
Right.
My understanding is that things here aren't as bad as they are in Canada. There's a lot of more manufacturing here as well. So there's a lot more to lose.
For sure.
The U.S. has a lot more. Yeah. So both parties are pretty motivated to come together. I don't know the outcome of it. No one does, but right now it doesn't seem too bad. The business culture is different than U.S. and Canada, but in terms of what we're talking about in tariffs, yeah, I think it's a bit more promising than what we're seeing in Canada.
Okay, well, on the north, because most of I would say about 99.9% of our listeners that we know of, now who knows, we may have some listeners in Mexico. I think we have some in Australia now. But in Canada and the United States, business is not brisk. People are hurting, but you're still buying, you're still facilitating the buying and selling of businesses. Yeah. So obviously people want to buy certain businesses and other people probably want to sell. Either they've had enough because they don't want to lose any more money, or you know what, they're aging out. What is it? Is it both?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, the demographics plays a huge role. Also, though, it's kind of like if you look at the stock market, when some stocks go up, some stocks go down. If there's movement, that means there's transactions. So let's say that you're dealing with a market that's contracting right now, which is what's happening in Canada. What's it do to the buyer community? The buyer community has two ways to react. One is to be more aggressive because they're also feeling the pinch and they have a large war chest from the COVID years. Or their psychology could be to put the wallet away and wait for the sun to shine again, at some point. So there may be less buyers, but perhaps the buyers that are there are more motivated than usual.
There's an old expression: you buy real estate when the street is on fire, and I think it holds true with business.
Yep. Pardon me. There's a bit of glitch in the connection.
Yeah, it looked like he
well, it's no problem.
jumped out for a second. Okay, I think he's coming back in now.
Yeah, no problem.
This may be a really good time for somebody that's running an existing trucking business to look at buying a strategic competitor somewhere.
Well, you bring up a good point.
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit on your question there, Chuck.
It may be a very good time for people in the trucking industry to buy a company if it's a strategic purchase. Rico and I were talking a few minutes just before the show in the green room, and he said, "Well, who wants to buy a trucking company when this market is like this?" And if you've got freight going from let's just say Laredo to New York, but you don't have anything from New York to Laredo, and there's a company for sale that has lots of freight from New York to Laredo, that may be a great strategy to buy.
Yeah, it may be a great strategy to. However, just to elaborate on that one point, like it's a bit of a counterpart of transactions, and I'd always ask the owners, and of course they would not hesitate to tell me either. For example, I don't know what I'm buying if this company has less customers or their customers are down 50%. It's black box, so therefore I'm not acquiring. And also, same thing with a seller. He would say, well, why would I sell my company when I don't know what's to become my customer base? So there is that counterpoint, hesitation to acquire in bad markets, not just from the sell side, but from the buy side as well. Well, that being said, though, strategic kind of trumps everything, right? Because if you have a good lane or a good customer, or you need a stake in the ground over there, then of course it becomes a move of desperation if you're dealing in a contracted market. So, as I alluded to earlier, there is that, right? So now kind of explain why you see a lot of people moving away from the M&A, and then you also see why those that are at the table won't hesitate to spend their money and buy a company, but it's got to make really good sense to them.
Yeah, I was just reading the other day about the story on J.B. Hunt, and I was not aware. I remember when J.B. Hunt became a very common household name about 35 years ago after deregulation, but how they grew so quickly, that is a company that's full of acquisitions.
Yeah, we know that the largest companies, the billion-dollar guys and up, majority of them, when they get to that threshold, for them to grow is through aggressive acquisitions, right? Like we've seen it with TFI, with all of them.
Yeah, look at the empire that Brad Jacobs built. He's the first one that comes to mind. He built an empire. And he hasn't been around this business that long.
No, it's amazing, from my perspective, because I talked to a guy that's been in business 20 years. He's making $1 million a year for 15, 20 years, and that's commendable, right? that's the top of the half of the 1%, of course. Then you get these other guys that are doing $1 billion, $2 billion, and they've been in business for years, or 10 years, and they skyrocket their company. And it's just amazing to see the differences between the two owners, where one looks at it more of an operational success. The guy making $1 million a year, he's got to, make sure that the company's tight, his operations are good, people show up, and good customer service, all those things that matter, as you know about. But then you got the guys that are cranking $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion a year. Those are systems guys. They're engineers.
Yes.
They're engineers.
Yeah, exactly.
They happen to be bit. Yeah. So it's very cool to see the difference. I mean, I have a lot of respect for both. How could you not, right? But
now,
in terms of growth, it's amazing.
But have you seen a lot of the guys making $1 million a year, which is incredible money in this business?
It's incredible money, yeah. For sure.
But have you seen a lot of them transition into $billion empires?
No, there's not very many that transition to $1 billion empires, but there are a lot of guys that, if we live longer, they get there.
Yeah, you know what? You have to
there's some. Yeah, and there's some guys that I work with that want to be billionaire, that want a $1 billion company, right? And they use my services to acquire companies to get to that $1 billion threshold. And they're climbing. They do 100 million, 150, they get to 200-300 million. One day they're going to do it if they choose to stay in the business long enough. If they can, second generation, if they have the gumption that the first generation does, they have a chance. Now you're getting a lot of guys backed by private equity that, of course, can accelerate the process tremendously.
Oh, yeah. I know a lot of, I sold my shares to a private equity firm. And the wonderful thing about them is you get the expertise that you don't get anywhere else. It's really hard. You're getting a lot.
You're absolutely right. It's completely amazing. It's completely amazing because if you sell your company to private equity, you have to qualify to sell to private equity, right? The smartest finance guys, the smartest money guys, the smartest corporate lawyer guys, just Harvard, Yale, Princeton guys, when they graduate, where do they go? Majority of them go to private equity, right? And
yes.
So if you're selling to private equity, the first thing you get is a bunch of brain power, which is a huge plus. And the second thing you get is the private equity senior management, such as the founder, co-founder, the top brass. These guys are not only the smart. The third thing you get is billions of dollars, because the average PE is going to have like 6 billion in, right? So you got an unlimited amount of money, unlimited amount of brains, unlimited amount of experience, and they all have one goal in common. That's to make your company bigger, as fast and as intelligent as possible. And let's not forget the fourth thing that private equity brings to the table is the participants. That billions of dollars, where does that come from? Billionaires. They're no dummies either. So you have all this brain power, and it's a truly wonderful way to grow the company if you can qualify to get to the table.
I want to add one thing. What the other thing you get, which I didn't realize until I started to be pursued by private equity companies, was when you're part of a private equity company, you get to do business with their other companies. So that means that if you're in trouble,
this is,
these guys own a furniture company and they own a lawnmower company, you're going to be hauling lawnmowers probably, and you're going to be hauling furniture.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the private equity guys, they bring a lot of intelligence, a lot of strategic fits, and it's not just one strategic fit, it's many, just like you said. So, I encourage business owners that, to do M&A, get the business growing, get to a point where you become appetizing to a PE. And then, if you want to move forward, I say this, why go it alone? It doesn't make any sense to go it alone these days, right?
you
It's
know,
not like you're.
I
It's not like you're. It's not like you're going to have less if you sold, let's say, like 70% to private equity. You retain 30%, and in 5 years you sell the other 30%. You sold your company twice, right? You're going to make just as
a
much money two
hundred
times over.
exactly. And you know what? You'll go twice as far in half the time.
This is the whole point. Twice as far in half the time. So, and these days it's so strange when you look at the market out there and you see, and we'll just talk about the Canadian market for a moment. You can see how it's gotten smaller through the years in that there's actually less worthy trucking companies, less
Yeah.
worthy shipping companies, and now everyone knows everyone. Whereas it wasn't really that way before. So the customers are getting bigger. They demand more because the customers are doing their own M&A, so they're growing. So you have to grow.
I got I got a
M&A is the only way to do it. Yep.
got a question for you, Brad. So, what would be if someone were interested in trying to be attractive to um, private equity or something of that nature? What are there certain benchmarks or a certain blueprint that's laid out that maybe they need to be targets that they need to hit in order to get that type of attention?
Yeah, there are, and this is why it's hard to become qualified to be appetizing to an M&A because the 1 million bucks a year doesn't mean much to them.
Right.
Really, we're talking 10 million bucks a year is you get on the radar screen, but as you know, there's really no limit. Some of these private equity company owns hundreds of companies, so it's really mind-boggling. But yeah, I would say if you can get to that 10 million mark, you're probably going to be qualified. It's hard to believe, right? You think, geez, some guy making 10 million bucks a year barely makes it in the door. It's
Yeah.
hard to
That's how
fathom.
big. There are
So,
some private equity guys out there that will look at smaller ventures in order to put a whole bunch together, piece them all together, and then have a large one. And now all of a sudden they've got something that they bought fairly cheap that's now worth a lot of money very quickly because what they'll do is they'll find out that, again, to your name, they'll find out the synergies between all of them and cut some overhead. They'll do that sometimes. And that's,
I think what you're talking about, and how I interpret that is more like a roll up, and whoever does a roll up, whether it's one guy or a PE or whoever's behind doing roll ups, if you can pull it off, go ahead. I've tried to sponsor a few roll ups. It's very difficult, right?
oh,
That's
yeah,
been
I
my
agree.
experience.
That's Brad Jacobs' genius, really. That's the genius behind
Yeah,
him.
yeah. Well, yeah, he's trumpeting it from the chairman position, and it's pretty good to be able to do that, right? And
Yeah,
companies that do a lot of acquiring, in a way, they do a roll up. I mean, the banks throw money at them. They have private money available. They have money themselves. So, but they're very picky on who they bring to the table. But still, yeah, roll ups are a smart move. And
yeah,
just to
they don't
expand on the
like
roll up point,
losses.
yeah, yeah. If you own a small company and you're struggling, I'm sure you're struggling. If you're in business, usually you're struggling because if you're not struggling, you aren't growing. So it's a struggle. And if you have a small company and you're struggling, and you want to make your life better, I would suggest do a bunch of small roll-ups, small companies where a guy's making 100 grand, this guy's making 200 grand a year. Fold those into what you got, and don't stop because there's a lot of those small companies that aren't marketable per se, because the earnings amount is questionable. A guy's making 200,000 a year. Well, something goes wrong, now he's making nothing.
right.
Yes.
So it's kind of a risk for someone to buy that company. But if you're making 200 grand a year and you own a company, then you can buy someone making 100 and 200 and so on, and you can amass something to roll into something larger in time. Because there's a lot of these smaller little companies that are basically worthless. I hate to say it that way, but they're kind of worthless in the M&A market unless you roll them all up, as you're talking about, Chuck.
But they can be bought right now. As I said earlier, You buy real estate when the street's on fire. It's on fire right now, gentlemen. Do we know that? One thing that I do want to talk also, and I'm a big believer in it, you tell me, but I think we should all run our businesses from day one with the intention of building it, not just for cash flow, but so one day we can sell it. I think a business has to be run that way. So you keep it clean. You don't do anything questionable. If a piece of equipment isn't roadworthy, you do not send it on the road, because there's your business. You hire the right people. You do things right, as far there's no crooked or weird accounting. You don't put trucks in your mother-in-law's name. All the stuff that we've all seen through the years.
The squeaky clean company is the best one. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I can tell you from my own experience, when you're dealing with a buyer, they are going to, whether it's a private equity firm or another trucking company, they're going to want to see everything. So you can't have any secrets. Everything's got to be squeaky clean.
Of course, yeah. Having a squeaky clean company is imperative for a smooth transaction. Now, let's say you don't have a squeaky clean company, and you still want to sell it. Well, like you say, you have to be transparent, of course, and that'll help with the buyer's due diligence process. But if there's too many warts, no thanks. They're gonna walk away.
So, what is your recipe? What do you want to see as a business? Really, you're really a merchant banker, as far as I'm concerned, because that's what they do. What do you want to see the way a company is run if you're going to handle the sale for one of our listeners on this company? What are you looking for so that you make sure that it's scalable in the market? I don't think there's anything worse than
what I'm looking for in a company is a whole bunch of things. I mean, well, you want EBITDA margins, you want adjusted earnings, you want a good revenue run rate, cash flow from operations, free cash flow, working capital, how efficient is that, net income margin. These are things that are measurable, that the buyer's going to look at and determine if they want to acquire the company. So that's one thing to look at. The other thing to look at is what can you get if you're selling the company, such as factors like your earnout, vendor take back consulting fees, retaining a minority stake in the company that buys you, taking the receivables, retaining those, capital gains. So there's two ways to look at it. What can you do to prepare the company for a clean sale, and what can you do to maximize the amount of money you're going to get from the sale?
And you want to do both of those.
You have to, yeah. You got to do both of them, yeah. And one of those, would be audited statements as an example to make a squeaky clean sale.
Oh yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
Rather than pull out the shoebox or, have your information ready and organized. Yeah, very important.
Well, I'm a big believer. If anybody's running anywhere more than 5 trucks or so, I would say get audited statements, because you're going to need to borrow money. That makes it easy right there. And then that way, if you have 10 or 20 or 30 years of audited statements, man, that makes things a lot easier. Somebody has done all your work and a lot of the buyer's work.
There's no higher compliment to a company that has audited statements annually. It's the smartest thing you can do for your company, especially if you're in the long run grooming it to sell. It shows integrity, which is really the foundation of everything is integrity, right?
Yeah, I think, in my personal opinion, I honestly think you should prepare to sell it the day you start it. That's what you're building. What are you building if you're not building something to sell? whether you sell it to your kids,
Yeah.
unless you plan on, working till you're 90. Most people don't want to, at the age of 70 or 80 at the latest, they want to go and, see what Miami looks like in the winter.
I have a listing in New York. The guy is a really nice guy. He's 90, and in his lifetime, he's done 88 acquisitions. In the 80s, he was up to 800 million. Yeah, yeah, and he's scaled back now, and he just has whatever's left over from everything. It's a strong company with the $3 million EBITDA US, so it's a strong company. But there's a good example. Some guys, when they get in the world of working, as you know, it becomes everything to them. It's as important as their kids. It's as important as their wife. It's the most important thing to them. Yeah. So, and letting go of that company is a real challenge for people really that don't have kids that are taking it over. Right. Pardon me for continuing, but the kids that take over, it's also very interesting because there's two types of kids that come into the company: the freeloaders that do nothing, right? And then there's the guys who want to make it work, but don't have the same talent as dad. Because to be an entrepreneur, you're cut from a certain cloth. You're just like a cat that lands on their feet. You have this 360 thinking, and combined with your experience and all this other stuff, it just makes you a very unique individual. So it's very hard for a kid to be like dad. So what you see in these companies is you get the one kid, like the serious guys, not the freeloaders, right? The one kid becomes an accountant. The other kid becomes a mechanic. The other kid looks after, HR. And that's that generation. That's what they do, right? Because he's still mid, make sure that everyone's all the pieces of the chessboard are in place, and the kids perform their function right that way. That's what I've seen. And as I said, partly for going on, but there's another. Yeah. I'm sorry. There's just one more I thought was an interesting point when I learned this, is that then is third generation, because that happens right now. Business has been around long enough. It's third generation. They're all doing 300 to 600 million a year, whatever. And what are the kids doing? Well, they're doing nothing. Nothing.
Yeah.
Even the guys, the second generation we talk about that are doing, this guy's an accountant, this guy's a lawyer, this guy's operations, this guy's a mechanic. No, not anymore. No. They hire the professionals now. And now the family's on a board, we're on the board, and the professional in the business. And I just think it's just worth noting in this podcast that, the three generations of how it works,
Well, yeah. In our case, the second generation came in with an education that the first generation didn't have, and was able to drive it right up because he was the missing ingredient towards making this thing skyrocket when it was just my wife and I, because he had that education. And the more people in the industry, the large carriers, I'm talking about the Roberts and the Maritime Ontarios, the big guys, the more we met these people, the more we realized our missing ingredient was we didn't have an accountant either at the helm of the ship or standing right between us at the helm of the ship. And the second, our son is an accountant, and the second he came in, all of a sudden, sales skyrocketed because he had the experience, because he'd been around us, and he had the knowledge that he had gained working, in school. And I see that with other people in the trucking business, where Kriska is another great example. Mark Seymour has done an unbelievable job with that company, and I believe that Mark is a skilled mechanic and also a bean counter, which are two. Those are two weird skill sets of the same guy to have. But what a great couple of skill sets for somebody to have in this industry.
I often get an opportunity to ask people how they started their company, what's going on, how did you get what you do, so on. And it's very interesting. I'd say a significant percentage of the mid-sized companies, they start their business because they quit working for the other guy. They quit, they're middle management. They saw a bunch of holes in the business model. They're like, I'm going to do this. That's one way. Another way is a customer says to the employee, hey, if you started your company, if you did this for me, we don't have to go through your company. So a lot of times, from what I've heard, owners get their start because one of the customers urged them to become a business owner and become their supplier, and that's how they got it off the ground. Kind of interesting.
Because they did a great job.
And there's a lot of that. Yeah, they recognize that the customer recognizes, hey, you're the man that makes sure that everything goes right with me, and that relationship flourishes. And then the bulk of the business owners are the brick by brick. They started it out.
Right.
They got their first customer, bought their first truck, and just heavyweight. Just build it that way.
So I got another question to throw at you, there, Brad. So I know that we're talking about trucking, but just across the board, across the entire spectrum, any business for that matter. A lot of stuff that I've been listening to here lately, there are a lot of people that are talking about how, we have an older generation, the baby boomers, which started most businesses, small businesses in America, and in North America, period. The baby boomer generation, they're at a point where they're starting to transition out or whatever, and they have very viable businesses that are thriving and making money, whether it be trucking or whether it be laundromats.
Anything, sure, yeah, that's right, yeah, anything.
So it's from a standpoint of someone, it may be a better decision maybe to pursue buying a company versus trying to start out a company. What are your thoughts on that?
You cut out. Can you repeat that sentence? Sorry.
I was saying that it may be a better proposition to pursue buying a company versus trying to start a company from start. If you're doing a startup yourself, it may be a smart move to maybe.
This is a really good point you bring up. Yeah. I just think that's a great question. I'll tell you why. Because there's two ways to the companies grow that I've seen. One is you go into the crowded room and you make your own shoulder room. Some people are better at it than others. And others it just explodes, like the pet rock is an example. You don't have to do anything. The Cabbage Patch Kids, all of a sudden the whole world wants it. So all of a sudden you're like on this wild horse and you're trying to manage the growth of your company. That's one way to do it. And more so to your point, of course, buy it, because I don't even know how you can start a company from scratch in today's world. And pardon me for saying that, but it's a huge pain in the ass, right? Because what are you going to do? Go to a multi-location company and say, hey, I want to be your supplier. They're going to go, what are you talking about? Who are you? We have an RFP process. You got to qualify for that. No. If you're trying to get a business off the ground, you can invest in the company instead versus trying to go brick by brick. Because I think the odds are against you. What do you think, Chuck?
The odds are definitely 100%. The odds are against you, especially in trucking right now. But that's how most of us start. Is we start with one truck, and then we find a driver, and we buy another truck, and then we buy another truck, and we get more customers, which is difficult to do as compared to just going out and buying a small company, even a small struggling company, where what the remedy is to fix it. That you have to. I don't think you can buy a company that's not doing well unless you have an idea how you're going to make it do well. What are they doing that you could do that they're not doing that's causing them to not do well? And that's where you can make a lot of money in trucking, is if you're a good operations person and you've find one that it's got some good bones, but it's got a lot of issues. But if you know what those issues are and you can fix them, you just you've got something better than the pet rock, because those pet rocks and the Cabbage Patch dolls, those are one in 10 billion things that happen in our lifetime. That just doesn't happen very often. And you see these people all the time on shows like Shark's Tank and Dragon's Den and all the rest of those that have an idea, and they pour, their heart and soul and all this money into this idea, and they blow their brains out, some weird golf club or whatever it is. And then sometimes you get one that takes off. So that's the problem with those things. But I really do think that if you can that's how you make money in any business, but especially trucking. If you know it and you know what the issue is, then you can fix it. There's a lot of really good businesses that are run really poorly. I noticed that. I was 21 years old, and I worked for a guy based in Ontario for a little while, just running Ontario and a little bit of Quebec. And it was owned by a medical doctor, this trucking company. And he ended up owning the company because he signed good for a friend. The bank called him one day and said, Doc, I'm not going to give away his last name. He's probably deceased, but said, Doctor, what are you going to do about this? Do you want to run a trucking company, or you want to just pay the bill? Because your friend can't be found. He couldn't find his friend. So him and his wife started running the trucking company part-time. And I have to tell you, at 21 years old, it was my second job in the trucking industry. I had my truck on there, and it was a disaster. And I went to him one day in his office, and I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal here. Let me run this place. I won't charge you anything. I want a percentage on what I save you. That's all I want. And he threw me out of his office because he thought I was a long-haired kid that didn't know anything. But I knew more than he did, brand new, because I saw where his problems were. He couldn't recognize what his problems were. He didn't realize that he had 20 guys sitting there every night smoking cigarettes on the clock, waiting to be dispatched for 2 hours. Well, a dispatcher evened his score with the boss for underpaying him. Things like that go on.
You bring up a really good point, is that like all the answers to the struggles of businessmen have, those majority of the answers are found in one place. It's outside of our body of knowledge. So, if we knew if we knew what we needed to know, we wouldn't have any problems. But yeah, sometimes it takes a set of eyes to come in and or whatever. But I just think that these days it's very, very difficult. Like now I have an office in Mexico. I cover a lot of the U.S. Eastern Time Zone and the key markets in Canada, right? And so I travel a lot, and I can see the differences in how the economies are. And I can say one thing for sure, like in Canada, when you drive around, there's no mom and pop shops anymore.
No.
Right? There's none. It's the franchises. The franchises have taken over, and the huge corporations have taken over. And an example here in Mexico, half of the businesses are small business. You walk down the road, this guy's got a welding shop, this guy does window tint, this guy does home alarms, this one sells purses, and they're all different. So like it depends on how mature the economy is. But as you can
100%.
see, where a fully developed economy goes, Canada's a great example. You can see how it's squeezed out, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who just want to have start something with, 10 employees. I'm going to say, in my opinion, it's very, very difficult. The customer demands are tough. The average customer is too big. It's just hard to get off the ground. And trucking's even worse because you have a lot of red tape to get a company off the ground and maintain it, right? A lot of bureaucracy.
100%. And the other thing that you bring to mind with that, your small business wants to deal with small business. But when you don't have any small business, there's nobody for them to deal with. So, and big business does not want to deal with small business. I can tell you, there's an ongoing thing in the truck industry. Everybody hates freight brokers. Okay. We are the new pariah or the industry. But what people don't realize is that a company like General Foods, General Motors, Kraft Foods, Pepsi. I'll name 1,000 of them. They don't want to deal with a guy with 5 trucks. They want no part of them
No,
because,
no, they can.
as a rule, the only thing you can do with those companies that have these multinationals is if you know somebody there, you may be able to be their local guy that bails them out of trouble. Their special events go-to guy. That's the best you're ever going to do. But to get on and grow
Yeah.
your company with one of those multinationals, forget it, man. You may as well try to get in the ring with Tyson when he was young. Even now, I don't think he'd last very long. It's the same thing. These guys don't want to talk to you.
Depends if the fight's rigged or not. It depends.
Good point. But you talk to these guys and they'll tell you the last thing I want to do is get a phone call at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon that a shipment's not going out. That the truck broke down. They don't want.
It's a struggle. Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it's a struggle there. So, it's interesting how our conversations kind of come to a point of, how hard is it for someone to get a company off the ground? It's a lot tougher in this day and age than it was, 15 years ago and 15 years before that and 15 years before that, right?
100%, because when I started up, I remember all I had to do was pick up the phone and I could have a customer. It was that easy. I remember buying a directory, a business directory. There were 3 big books. They were like encyclopedias of local businesses in the Toronto area. And I said to my business partner at the time, I said, open it up anyway. Let's see how good this thing is. And he went to the A's and he went to ARC, and it was a company called Arconas. I called them, first call, come in right away. We want to see you. That's how business was done. I'm talking a lot of years ago. If you guys were born, you were real little. I'm talking, like 1978, 79. This is a long, long time ago. It's getting closer to 50 years than it is 40 years. But that's how easy it was. And I know damn well it's not like that now. You can't even get somebody's name from a receptionist.
No, of course not. No, not a chance. And now it's even, if we just expand upon that point, and I like to think of what you're talking about as path of least resistance thinking. And what you did in the past certainly isn't the path of least resistance now. So, but
Right.
What is the path of least resistance now? What has proven to be the path of least resistance now? And it is private equity. Nothing's grown bigger, stronger, faster. There's no industry that's grown as big and strong as fast as private equity. And I'm not wrong, because all the brains go there anyway, and they're there for a reason because they're ahead of the curve, right? And that's where all the money's at. So now what you have is a congestion almost of private equity. And the private equity is on a mad hunt. They're on a mad hunt for a company that qualifies to come to their table. And there's less and less of them. I believe if we take that curve and go a little bit further ahead, what does that mean to us? Well, it means PE is going to merge. They're going to merge just like we see BlackRock, just like we saw in the early 80s, saw the newspapers merge. We've seen media merge. And we're going to end up seeing this whole kind of RoboCop world, where you have 1 or 2 companies that run a lot of everything. But, this is really what we're seeing right now. That's the real reality that I'm experiencing in my world.
Well, I'm sure. Because
I'm interested to kind of take it back to trucking and talking about mergers and acquisitions. And with things that's coming over the horizon, I know Chuck, we kind of disagree a little bit on this, but not terribly. But with the coming down the road of the autonomous trucks, the self-driving trucks, how big of a I'm not sure. I'm just asking inquisitively by you being in the mergers and acquisition space. How big of how much does that play into into future sales, or what people are looking for as far as buying companies that are on the verge of tapping into that part of the market?
That's a really another great question. And what I believe, you're talking about Aurora Drive, like those companies out in
Right.
Texas, and they're
Right.
trying to take over the Sunshine Belt, and you see some of this in Europe and in China and other areas. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it seems to be inevitable that there's going to be humongous driver loss. And just like with Bezos replacing the workers with robots, we're seeing a huge loss of, I think he's let off 850,000 people so far to robots. And you can imagine how much more money that guy makes by replacing
Right.
people
Of course.
who work 24/7. In China, we have dark manufacturing, obviously 24/7, all that stuff. And in the driverless world, we're coming up against, and we're seeing that in many areas of drone delivery, the driverless rigs. Uber loses money every year, but as soon as they go driverless, they're going to make $1 trillion, right? That's why people
Right.
keep investing in that. Yeah, we're going to see about. But how does that affect someone who owns a trucking company? Well, either they're going to get squashed out of the marketplace because the big guys can do it cheaper than them. They're going to buy driverless trucks themselves. So the company has less people in it. And the only fear, again, if you just look beyond the curve, where does it go? Where does it go when you have 50 to 80% of the companies having driverless vehicles and robots in the warehouse? Where does it go? It goes to a place where if an AI can legally own its own company, then you're really finished because you can't compete against that. Yeah, and if all you need is a government on the left is where this type of stuff comes from, to give autonomy to an AI company, where no, it's got the right to live, it's got the right to compete. Once you run into that problem, you're completely finished because it's a million times faster than anything we can do. It makes a million times
Right.
less mistakes than we make. So therefore, we're completely done. As long as it doesn't become autonomous and have a right to be a sovereign, then the ownership of companies will have to buy AI, as you're starting to see now.
Well, I mean, it's similar. People think about, as far as artificial intelligence just affecting your quote unquote manual jobs, but there are studies and stuff that are out there that are showing that there are AI doctors that get diagnoses correct the majority of the time versus human doctors.
That's true.
And when it comes to someone's health or whatever, what would you rather? Would you rather have someone that's the diagnosis be spot on 99% of the time, or
or nice bedside manner,
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're all looking at this. It's a brief moment in time that we're alive, and we're looking at this tiny segment of time of the end of the baby boomer era of business ownership and the onslaught of AI and large corporation taking. We have these converging factors that we just happen to be alive at this moment. We can see that these changes are very disruptive, and they are coming. So, the bigger picture of what happens in 20, 30 years from now, we kind of have a foggy idea. It's not going to be pretty compared to what it is now. And now it's hard. It's still hard right now. But sustaining yourself as a business owner, a small business owner in the future, I just don't even think it's on the table. What's that mean from a social and economic perspective? You have to do your ask chat GTP. But as for us right now, how to survive at this moment in time and you need the odds. What are the odds in your favor to survive at this moment in time? It would be to roll yourself up, small, roll yourself up. If you're medium, sell out, keep some minority stake in something that makes sense. And if you're larger, go to private equity. I think your best ROI is one of those three things, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, you're making a lot of sense. AI is here, and Rico and I have had some discussions. There's some, my understanding, the latest one was Aurora. They were running one of the big American truck lines out of Texas was running a lane, just like Rico always said they would, between point A and point B in Texas without drivers, and PACCAR made them stop
Yeah, they made him put a
because
driver back in the seat.
of liability. And our esteemed friend Hank Seaton, who's our friend who's an attorney, he always said this is where the bump in the road is the liability end. Who is responsible when there's no driver? When somebody gets killed, and it's inevitable. It's going to be a fatality.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But human innovation and the lawyers and the engineers, those are the ones, the three factors that change everything. An example would be a lawyer says we don't need liability, and an engineer says, well, let's make a road just for autonomous. Done, right? So we see that with rail, this hyper fast rails that are around the world, everywhere except Canada and U.S., but every other country, right?
Yeah.
So they just change they change the infrastructure, right, to suit the circumstance, which is less liability.
Yeah, my big concern with everything, and listen. I'm one guy, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. My big concern is we've got these plants, and I know now the automotive plants, for example, they're heavily automated, and they will become even more and more automated with time, because it's much more cost effective for manufacturers to invest in machinery than it is people, which is really sad. But what are these people going to do all day? How are they going to earn money to feed themselves if machinery is doing it all? How are we going to do this?
Well, that's an interesting question, but an interesting effect of that is, so you build a big factory, now everyone's out of work. Who's going to buy your product?
Bingo. Yes. Yeah.
It's a snake eating its tail, right? It's a snake eating its tail.
Right.
So the big question is and what is the answer, right? The answer is well, I think the answer is to not let that happen. I know the answer to that is social credit system, but I don't think anyone really wants to live that world. So unless we're forced into it, I don't know what the answer is for people that have the type of freedoms that your generations have enjoyed up till now. Since the Industrial Revolution, right?
Yes,
it's a problem. It's a big problem. It's interesting where this conversation we started talking about M&A and EBITDA and earnings and squeaky clean this and but now we're talking about our conversations evolved to the bigger concern that the elephant in the room. But not to regress, but just the timing right now is like what I'm talking about right now. What do you do if you own a company? And I would say, you got to use a cooperative effect. Cooperative effect, like Chuck, you work with PE, you found a better path for your company. All your people that work with you are now with a multi-billion-dollar corporation, right? They get to go home at night and say to their wife, hey, guess what? I was working for a company that hundreds of millions. Now I work for a company that does multi-billions. It's better for our kids, better for our grandkids, that type of thing. At this moment in time, like 10, 15 years from now.
Right.
Time changes, I don't know, but yeah, at this moment, yes. So if you're a small company, you're struggling, team up, do a roll up with the guy across the street, and then you guys roll up more and more,
Well,
that's
what
I see is the smart way.
I've seen companies do this and be very successful at it, merge part of their overheads where they've kept ownership the same. They may share a terminal, and they may share some shared services. They may share a billing department even. They may share a safety department. There's things like that that people can consider if they're finding it too overwhelming. And I think these times are very overwhelming for a truck operator.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it doesn't
They
matter
are.
whether you're on
It's tough for people.
one truck or 20 trucks. It's still overwhelming.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. It's
I'm
interesting what we
looking
talked
at.
about today. Yeah.
I was just saying, I'm looking at the time, and we kind of getting close to the hour. I wanted to give you, Brad, I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of, before we jump out of here, just give us some more details on some things that you find that you want to, closing statements that you would like to make, anything that you would like to say to leave us on, and how people may be able to find you and get in contact with you as well.
Well, you can reach me. You can email me as Brad at synergystockpile.biz. Shoot me an email if you have any questions about anything. I'm happy to work with you, give you, best insight I can. And I think we've done a good job today, guys, covering, the things that people need to hear about, or your audience needs to hear about in terms of increasing their odds of survival, right?
Yeah. I think it's wonderful that you were able to come and join us tonight. And I want you to come on again sometime because and do a live show, because I'm sure an awful lot of our listeners who are struggling are looking for some solutions. And I think now we've opened some interest tonight through this discussion on that there may be a future for them, and things that they've heard through this discussion with the three of us that perhaps they haven't considered previously.
You're right. Yeah. I mean, what we talked about tonight is really important stuff. It's just as important as having a good tax man working with you, a good operations person working with you. The forward-thinking strategies, what the entrepreneur is always forced to think about every morning when he gets up out of bed is, what's the vision? What do I do? What's the smartest thing? What's the most effective thing to do at every given moment? What is it? Right? And that's the path.
Yes.
So these days,
Yes.
if anyone does want to reach out to me, I can help link them up with a good partner, good opportunity. Can link them up with capital, link them up with whatever they need. I can just bring opportunities to them that are qualified to help them grow the business.
Well, that's what I think tonight has been a phenomenal show, because I think we've probably saved some of our listeners from doom. I really do. I think we've given them. I think we've thrown a life ring to some of them where they see that there's possibilities of things they never thought about, and things we never talked about on this show with the in-depth that we did tonight. We really and we just really scratched the nail on the head.
Well, it's been great. It's been great putting a name to your face, as talk to you for 13 years, meeting Rico. It's great, Yeah, for sure. So, happy to reach out to you guys again and develop a good business friendship. And, anything you need, just give me a shout. And I really appreciate you inviting me.
Brad, you and I are certainly going to keep in
pleasure.
touch. And if anybody wants to get hold of me, if anybody wants to get hold of me, reach me by email is the best way. chucksnow280@outlook.com. And if you didn't remember Brad's info, just send me an email. Put your phone number on it, and that way I can call you right back and give you the answers you need. And I'm going to let Rico back in the hole for another week.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you guys for taking the time out to join us. You could have been anywhere else in the world, but you took a little time to hang out with us, and we're always eternally grateful for you doing so. So if you would, ladies and gentlemen, like I said at the top of the show, if you found any of this information helpful or useful or know anyone that could use it, please share it with them. And please like, share, and subscribe. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I want you guys to continue to stay safe out there, stay healthy, keep it in between the mustard and the mayonnaise, and God willing, we'll talk at you same time, same place next week. God bless you and good night.
Catch you on the flip-flop. God bless.
Thanks again, Brad.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good night.